Well, this morning was quite fascinating, and I feel a bit like a fish out of water because you guys are all so smart. My background is more on the technology end, and like Carlos, my background is in computer science, so it certainly isn't as a scholar, and it is not even as a librarian. But you'll notice on the paper it says Digital Libraries and Information Technology, and I changed it a bit to digital libraries and archives because information technology is really, really a vague word. Not that digital libraries aren't and not that archives aren't, but IT I thought was a little bit out there, and I thought our archives brought this into a better scope for what we're talking about with ephemera. So this is just a quick overview of what I'd like to talk about today, and hopefully I will not fall behind schedule so that we can stay on time. So basically, what is a digital library? Again, it's a very vague term, and people talk about it, and I think everybody sort of listens and tries to figure out, now what exactly are they talking about when they say digital library? And then digital archives, and then talk about digital projects that support research, and then give some examples of some of the things we've done here at Rice. So what is a digital library? If you go out and Google digital libraries looking for definitions, you'll find many. Basically, I'm going to say a digital library is a collection or a collection of collections that are in digital format that support a subject area. And that's sort of, when you talk about a digital library, that's really what you're talking about. Digital libraries can provide additional supporting materials that help to contextualize what you would find in a digital archive. So your primary source materials that you would normally find in an archive, the surrogate of that, when you digitize it, the digital surrogate of that is really just the same thing. It's the surrogate primary source. But as a scholar, there's a lot of other stuff you'd like to either know about it or you'd like to contribute to it, write about it, research about it, do things with it. And a digital library gives you that opportunity to pull in those primary sources and then add a lot more context to it. Things like a timeline. You might want to be able to view primary sources along a timeline and what's going on. A geospatial display, you know, what's the location of these materials, and view it on a map. Adding a tag cloud, what are the key concepts of the materials included in this subject area in this digital library. Provide some teaching materials. It's one thing to have the primary source materials, but how do you convey to your students what those materials mean and why they're significant for what you're trying to do with them in a course. So all of that can be accommodated with a digital library. Digital archives, a distinction that I would make between digital libraries and digital archives is digital archives really care about the permanence of these items. So they don't concern themselves as much with providing the additional context around it, but it's really focused on that digital surrogate of the primary source or the born digital material, and the long-term stewardship of that, just as you would find in a traditional archive. Long-term preservation, committing to keep that around for a very long time. Persistent access to the content. Servers die, they get old. After 3 or 4 years, you're on to a new one. You don't want to have to go figure out what the new URL is that you need to know to go to that resource. So digital archives will give you persistent identifiers that will migrate across all of these different platforms over time as you need to migrate it. And what a digital archive gives you is strong support for discovering the resources. And that is certainly an advantage over a physical archive where you're limited in how you organize the material. you can't put an item in 10 different places, but you can in a digital archive. So it does give you an ability to create collections and virtual collections having only one digital image that you're actually storing and maintaining. But there are different ways to point at it, different ways to get to it, and it can be discovered more readily by scholars worldwide. They don't have to come to your physical archive to view the material unless they want to. And one of the things that digital archives now can provide is really a marketing service. If you are the Vietnam, let's see, where'd Kelly go? There you are. If you are the Vietnamese archive, Vietnam War archive, and your materials are out on the web, the serious scholars are going to discover it, and they'll work with it enough to the point where they say, I need to get to the original. So it really is a way to attract scholars to your holdings in an archive. And from a university perspective, it becomes a recruiting mechanism to bring in faculty, to bring in researchers, to work with those materials because they know you have them. So this is where they want to be. So there's a lot more flexibility with your digital archive, but that basic idea of long-term stewardship of these resources is the same as you would get with a physical archive. With the digital archive, you can provide open access to the materials, let everyone in the world see it, or sometimes you want to restrict that access for various reasons. There may be copyright reasons, there may be privacy reasons, there may be cultural reasons where you do not want to make that available to the world, and a digital archive will let you put the appropriate restrictions on it so that either nobody can get to it or the world can get to it or anything in between. Again, it's an archive. So it's, different. I distinguish it from a digital library, which, sticking with the ephemeral theme, you might think of a digital library as being more ephemeral. An archive is an archive. When something is archived, it should not be pulled out. If you're migrating across from one archive to another, that's one thing. Just as when one archive hands another one those resources, they're being transferred, and that's fine. But you generally, once researchers especially start working with the materials, it's not okay to pull it out. A lot of people think because it's digital, you just take it down. You're messing with people's scholarship when you do that. You cannot assume that nobody's relying on that material anymore. I'd say the primary services of a digital archive are providing discovery tools, preserving this material long-term, making sure the bits don't change over time, making sure it's geographically distributed, there's not a single copy, and it's not just backed up and kept locally, but that there are multiple copies that live all the way, in a global distribution. And then being able to organize content according to the needs of the scholars, according to the needs of the users. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of flexibility you can have when you're organizing content in the digital archive. So, and then I'm going to talk about digital projects for research, because to me that sort of combines this idea of digital libraries and digital archives. When your content is in digital format, and sometimes it's born digital, others, I think most of the scholarly content we think of today is actually physical material that's been digitized, but it can be either. And when it's in digital format, then there's a lot of flexibility for researchers to be able to think in new ways about the materials. In a library and in an archive, materials were described in a certain way because they had to be. They were physical, and there were limits on what could be done. Especially if it's a non-textual item, you're totally relying on the description that the archivist has thought about in describing that article as to whether or not you're going to be able to find it. And if they've published that in a finding aid online, then you can search their finding aid. Once you go digital, there is a lot more flexibility, especially if it's a print textual item, because then you have access to the full text. You can search materials and find things that were not in the original cataloging descriptions. You can find not only the metadata elements about it, but based on the full text, you're going to be able, as a researcher, to pull up materials that may have been originally classified over in astronomy, and you're a political scientist. Well, for some reason, there's something over there, and the catalogers made a decision, or the archivists made a decision about how that should be thought about. When it's in digital form, you get freed up quite a bit to think about things in new ways, since you are not restricted to one set of descriptions. And when it's digital, you don't have to form a single collection and have it live only in that one. It can live in lots of different collections. So there's a lot of freedom for the scholar to really open their horizons. When you create a web presence for a research project, then you can get into this area of what I would call really starting to get into more the digital library as opposed to the digital archive. And to me, a strong architecture for a digital project that supports research is going to be pulling archived content from a digital archive into a research project website, and then add some of these additional features and add some of that additional context that enriches it for what you're studying. I like to think of it as more the pure, surrogate primary source is still in the archive, and 50 different researchers around the world may be pulling on it for completely different reasons, and it's the pure, unadulterated primary resource. Everybody else can have their digital library project that pulls that and then provides all of their context to support the research they're trying to do. So at Rice, we do have the Rice Ephemeral Archive, which has really been a lot of fun to work with. We started working with Steve Lewis a few years ago, and it's just really fun material. I have a Chinese programmer who works on the digital archive, and I started talking with Steve about trying to put this content into the digital archive. He had it on a sort of a custom-grown website and in a database that wasn't scalable, and it reached its breaking point. He got enough content in there, it reached its breaking point. So I introduced him to the archive. And because the material is, it's a lot of fun from my perspective. It's not your typical traditional archive material. He has students out there, taking digital photos, and has been, they've been taking it for like 10 years of these, more than 10 years of these, subway ads. And it's, quite revealing, quite interesting. Some of it, I certainly couldn't understand it, but I paired him up with my Chinese programmer who speaks Chinese, and she was able to not only work with him to get the content into the repository, but actually work with him to get some of the metadata into Chinese, and I'll show you examples of that as well. So this is a little hard to see, but the way the materials are organized in our institutional repository, our archive, we have sort of the archive itself. It's Rice Digital Scholarship Archive, and then the scheme that's followed, we use the DSpace platform. The scheme that's followed is you have communities and subcommunities and collections, and so the content is all held in collections. So these are the actual collections, and the community here that we're really looking at, it's actually set up as a subcommunity, but community is subway the Subway Advertisement Archive. And then here are the various collections: Beijing, Hong Kong, Kaohsiung, I can't pronounce all these, Shanghai, Singapore, and Taipei for now. And it will show you how many items we have for each of these different collections. And each item in the collection can have multiple pieces of ephemera associated with it, and I'll show you an example of that. Within these different collections, as I mentioned, because you can have a single item live in multiple collections, it could be that something from Beijing may have had some applicability to one of these other collections as well, and so it could be mapped in here. So there is a lot of flexibility. And just to show you an example of what an item looks like, it gives you a preview. If you find an item, and this particular one is the Beijing Metro poster. You'll see it up in the green banner, the title of the item. And then it shows you a thumbnail of what all is included in that particular item, along with a preview of the metadata. If you want to look at the full metadata record, this is what it would look like. You can open it up and take a look, and you'll see that we've started to include now Chinese in that. And in the repository, you can search in Chinese. So, and all of this is discoverable via Google and Google Scholar. We get very high hits in Google Scholar especially. So anybody searching, in Chinese for these will find this particular item. And these are the 4 items in there. These are not high resolution images in this particular collection, which is unfortunate, but we'll take what we can get, and at least it's something. And then, and then an example I wanted to show you then of a digital library site. We don't have one for ephemera yet, but hopefully we will. But this is a different project, the Our America's Archive Partnership Project, where we start to bring in a lot more context. So we have things like a tag cloud down here of the key concepts in the archive, and it tells about the different contributors. So it's not just coming out of Rice, it's coming out of University of Maryland and also Instituto Mora in Mexico, where we've collaborated and pulled together for the researchers' use the different collections that still reside at those locations. Well, certainly at Maryland. It resides there, but to the scholar, it's invisible, the fact that it resides there. We don't need to centralize it. We just pull it in through the interface. So if we did a search, I did a search on exploration to show an example. We'll end up getting materials from Rice, from Instituto Mora, and from University of Maryland, all showing up in the search results. And you just get a summary of it. And then if you wanted to see those results presented on a timeline, you could do that. If you wanted to see them presented geographically on a map, like where are these locations. And then the green arrows just represent multiple items at a given location. And then you can click on one of those arrows and you'll see some of them have like 50 or 100 items. This particular one had 2. It's going at its own pace. So, and then another example is from our Woodson archives. They've been starting to build exhibits. So that's another thing they can do, is pull the images out of the archive and still have them stewarded, the digital items stewarded in the digital archive, yet build their own exhibits where they can add that additional context into it themselves and tell the story of these particular collections and what that means. And there are tools to do this. They're using a platform called Omeka that is very easy to start pulling pieces together and give that additional context. So in summary, what I would say is that digital archives provide a very solid infrastructure for the total stewardship of the digital objects. But they're really not intended to provide that additional context. And I know that came up some this morning about capturing context. I don't know that the archive is the right place to capture the context. Digital libraries, online exhibit platforms, and then these just digital project websites are the places where you can add in that context. You can eventually preserve a digital library site itself if you want to add that to your preservation set of things to do. You get a lot of flexibility, a lot of scalability when you start to think about these things from these different perspectives and really think about how you provide an architecture, and that's the IT piece of it, how you provide the architecture that lets the right pieces live in the right places for the right amount of time. And then you can get that content out there on the websites, add your context, yet keep your surrogate primary source materials in place so others can add their own context to them, and you don't need to taint it with your own annotations and perspectives.